Okay, we're coming in. Hello and welcome to the Big Ben Show with me, Lester Holloway and Alex Watson, here for another hour of political debate and social commentary about the issues that affect you. Of course, this is an interactive show, as always, so we do want you to call in and join the discussion, put questions to us, your comments and also your questions directly to the guests that we'll be having in the show. Lots of topics we're going to be debating: immigration, health and much more, and of course a bit of politics, as we always do here on the Big Ben Show, especially with Big Ben behind me. One of the big stories in today's papers, of course, is immigration. The Conservatives have announced a new immigration bill going through the House of Commons. We've pretty much had an immigration bill every second year for the last 15 years or so. So asylum seekers and immigrants seem to be perhaps the most legislated upon section of society. But is this really what we need? Is this the biggest issue affecting society at the moment? We want your views about that. And also with this crackdown on illegal working, well, I suppose the question which I have is that, well, illegal working is surely illegal already, so why do you need to criminalise it twice? And also, who is going to pick the crops in Lincolnshire if it is not Eastern Europeans as well? Do you think the young British will be getting out there to towns like Boston to pick strawberries? I think I'll leave that question to you and to our guests a little later on. And of course, the other big story in the news is Chuka Umunna, the Labour leadership contender, until he threw his hat out of the ring. He was being tipped by the bookies as the favourite. There he is, looking very proud and very prime ministerial perhaps, but not anymore, because the Labour's shadow business secretary has decided that he's not going to be running for the leadership, saying that he's only been in Parliament for 5 years and it's too early. I'm looking at a story in the Voice newspaper here, which is highlighted Chuka, I have nothing to hide, and some very strong comments by Simon Woolley of Operation Black Vote that we often have on this show. Simon says, truth is, Chuka has just let himself and his family down. He has let down a generation of black people who wanted to support him to be a future Prime Minister. Very strong words indeed, so we'll be talking about all of that and more a little later on. So Alex, who's coming up for us?
All right, we've got Chantal Miller from Shanti Media, and we've got Patrick Vernon, OBE no less, and he'll be coming to talk about health today, so looking forward to it. Absolutely, and we want you to call in as well, so caller number will be appearing on the screen very shortly and throughout the programme. Just to remind you, it's 0208 808 0693. That's 0208 808 0693. So there you are. Get your fingers on the digits. Now we'll start with a paper review, and my very special guest to review the papers is Paul McFarlane, who is an employment lawyer. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hello, Lester. Hello, Alice.
Hi. So you've been busy, sort of, putting your nose down into the papers. What's really leaked out for you?
Well, in today's Mirror, there's an article called May Cop Rant, and it's Theresa May's speech to the Police Federation at Bournemouth yesterday, where she was criticising the Police Federation because of their continued criticisms of her and the cuts that have been made to the police forces and the police forces' budget. And she is at pains to make the point that actually, during the course of the last Parliament, whilst there has been less money given to the police, there has been a reduction in crime. And so that was her criticism of the police. She just said to them that really actually you shouldn't be ranting on about this. We can make more for less.
Yeah, so she's very much digging her kit in the heels into the Police Federation. Just to explain, the Police Federation is the body that represents the rank and file of the police services. So it's not the actual authorities themselves, but it's the police themselves. So what do you make of this?
I was actually speaking on to a police conference yesterday on employment law issues, and it was pointed out to me that actually reduction in crime has been across Europe. It's not just been in the UK, it's not unique to the UK. And the other thing that's come out, I think, is also, yes, there have been cuts, but query how much more can you cut without there being an effect on crime in this country.
And hasn't there been a rise in actual things like violent crime, and so there's actually been a rise in certain sorts of crime.
Yes.
So there's been a reduction in maybe street level crimes.
That's right.
But there's been a surge. Remember, we had Yahya King on a few weeks back, and he was talking about how there's some of these crimes are actually hidden now, and they're more difficult to tackle. Things like domestic violence, trafficking. A lot of those things have actually increased, but we don't really see that.
I think one of the interesting things which Theresa May was talking about was that she said that every time the Police Federation had said that their members were dismayed, which was a number of years, in each of those years crime had actually gone down, so we're not quite sure what the police were dismayed about. But don't you think, Paul, that actually a Home Secretary needs the support of the police service, that if she makes enemies of them, as she clearly appears to be doing, it's not going to help her in getting crime figures down further?
I think it's a very dangerous step to be continually attacking the rank and file. Obviously, you do need to question where money's been spent, and you need to question how it's been spent. But continuing attacking the rank and file is not actually going to endear them to you and endear them to what you want to do.
But the rank and file don't really endear themselves to the public a lot of the time.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's true.
At the same time, they've got a case to answer for with not just their spending, but things like the police corruption, their behaviour. There's been lots of things that's coming out. We had Lee Jasper on a few weeks back talking about corruption in the Met, and we don't pay our taxes for that kind of behaviour. Stalking the Lawrences, civil rights groups, environmental groups. I know we're kind of putting them all in the same pot, but they are accountable. And I think the police historically have always kind of held governments by the short and curlies, if I can put it a better way, because we do rely on them for stability in terms of law and order. And I think governments are usually very afraid to go for them. So in that respect, she's probably taken quite a bold step in terms of confronting some of the issues that are there, but let's see. I
suppose the question is whether or not she's actually confronting those issues,
perhaps,
or confronting issues that are on her agenda. I hear what you say, but I'm not sure whether or not it's that she's looking at, or other things.
Look at the case that we had with Andrew Mitchell and the police.
Yeah.
That was a kind of prime tug of war, battle of power battle, with the Plebgate situation. And I think she has, over the last few years, relationships between the police and the government have decreased, and you wouldn't normally expect that from a kind of conservative government or a Tory government. But I think that
you mean that you wouldn't expect that?
No, you wouldn't expect it. But there's cuts being had all over the place, and I still think we're cutting the wrong things from the wrong people. Whether the police should be cut and whether it's going to affect frontline services. If it is, then that's very worrying for the populace. That's very worrying for us, because we do need them, but we do need them to be accountable for us and our servants.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to perhaps come back on to the police service a bit later on. If anybody wants to call and join the conversation, we'll come back to it. The number will be appearing on the screen, 0208 808 0693. But we'll move on to other topics. Anything else caught your attention, Paul?
Yes. Story in today's Daily Star, not one I usually read.
Always good for the best, most up-to-date information, yes.
It's actually quite a tragic story. It's about Rio Ferdinand. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm showing everyone. Yeah. Rio Ferdinand tragically losing his wife very recently, and opening out his heart for the first time about his loss. Really, really sad. Actually, it's quite resonant with me, because a friend of ours lost his wife at 41 very recently, and dealing with that. So he's got 3 young children, Rio has, and our friend's got 2. Very, very tragic story. And also, I think last week I was seeing on Twitter some really nasty tweets to Rio about this. No. And it really was very, very sad. That people can, when a man is grieving at this time, not being sympathetic.
Twitter
in
really
that way.
can be a cesspit at times.
Yeah.
Can't it? Yes. Of course, it's very, very sad, you know, that he's lost his partner there. Just actually another football story I'll just throw into the mix is that a lot of people have been talking about the Tottenham striker Emmanuel Adebayor, who's been venting his spleen, if you like, for the third time with these very, very long Facebook posts, essentially having a pop at various members of his close family. For sort of all sorts of things, but generally for sucking him dry of all the money that he's been earning as a top footballer. Well, what do you make of that, Alex?
I just think, just in terms of both Rio and Adebayor, it just goes to show you with all the talent and money in the world, you cannot buy happiness, you cannot protect yourself from the ravages and, you know, the whims and fancies of life, whether it's the family issues, family problems, whether it's health issues. And I think people should be, you know, really be mindful of that. You know, sometimes we lift these people up and we think that they don't have any problems, but they do. I think it's extremely sad that he's obviously got, you know, family issues, as a lot of us have, and they are, you know, our family is supposed to be the bedrock of our, you know, our foundation, the place, the springboard from where we kind of, you know, have our confidence.
But it almost feels like he's cutting himself off from his family now. I mean, exposing them in such a way. I mean, his Facebook posts, all three of them, have had a distribution of thousands and thousands of people have been sharing them.
Well, perhaps
this is very embarrassing for his family. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is quite sad that he's had to feel necessary to vent this all in public and air it all in public, and there was not a way that could be dealt with privately. Obviously, all families have issues of one sort or another, and you know, it's not something that I'd want to be getting involved in the public arena. So I think it's quite sad.
I think we're in an age, though, isn't it? Everything's so public, people are so social, and perhaps somebody like him. I mean, I think in one sense it's quite brave. It is airing your dirty linen in public, which is perhaps not good. But I do think that as communities of all across the board, we sometimes hold these things and we hide them, and therefore, if they're not brought to light, we cannot solve them. And I think, you know, freeloading families, I think Oprah's dealt with it, I think Madonna's dealt with it, Elton's dealt with it, you know, and to be more importantly, the suicidal aspect, the fact that he has been brought to, he's felt suicidal at times, or he's got these issues, leads to a deeper problem which may be related to his family. So I think there's a lot more issues there than a few cryptic Facebook posts can shed a light on. And it would be interesting to really, you know, I like to go deep into these things. I like to know what's behind something.
Don't you think that he's got those problems? Wouldn't it be better that he got professional help rather than... Yes, he's airing this all in public, but actually, is it going to? You say going deep into it, but going deep into it, really, he might need professional help to help him, rather than airing this all out in public, so that therefore someone else can have a go at him about something else.
Yeah, it's quite interesting the fact that with all that money, you don't think to get professional help. I don't understand the rationale, to be honest. It's like, it's quite surprising, you know, but perhaps he does want to embarrass members of his family, and you know,
I think he does. He's probably had enough of them. But the thing that I found really interesting is that you know, looking at the Facebook posts themselves, looking at the threads underneath, he was Manuel Adebayor, or Manu as people call him, is getting most sympathy actually from a lot of African people who are saying, "I recognise my family in everything that you're saying." But there was one actual sort of incident which was in his latest post, which I thought was quite amusing, which is that he was saying that his younger brother, Rotimi Adebayor, he brought him to a club as a youth player, and he got kicked out for allegedly, according to Emmanuel Adebayor, stealing 21 phones, mobile phones from his colleagues. And then Rotimi phoned up Emmanuel and said, "But it wasn't 21 phones. It wasn't as much as that."
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You know, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Yes. You know, Manny, you're stuck with them, and you're going to have to work this through, unfortunately.
Indeed.
You know.
Indeed, absolutely, yes. We haven't got time for one or two more.
One more.
Quickly,
okay.
Yes.
In the Eye today.
Yeah, this is the Independence Eye.
Yeah, that's right.
The mini Eye.
Story fallout of the election. Labour's continued sort of infighting. I know you're going to talk about Chuka later on, but just in terms of the change of leadership, there seems to be a call amongst senior figures within the Labour Party to have more relaxed rules on calling an election for the new leader, so that it seems to be quite a restrictive way that
What do you mean relaxed rules? Because I know they've already introduced one vote.
The only way you can call a leadership election, apparently, is if you have a special conference or it's dealt with by annual conference. And that seems to be quite restrictive compared to the Conservatives, where apparently 15% of members can call for a confidence vote. And so it seems that what they want to do is have this person on probation for 2 years, see how they're going. And if they feel to be no good, then they can oust them, because it was felt that with Gordon Brown it was difficult to get rid of him prior to the last election.
Is this a recipe to have an election for Labour leader every single year?
Well, maybe this is a way to kind of, maybe Chuka's just taken a step back, you know, and he's not out of the race totally. Maybe he's doing a Boris Johnson on us, you know, being very strategic about his, you know, throwing his hat in the ring. Maybe he's not ready yet, and if they've got these rules, which means that they can change somebody out, maybe we'll see him come back to...
Yeah, I mean, on the Chuka situation, actually, personally, although he put his name in the ring, I thought it was a mistake him putting his name in the ring this early anyway. He's only been an MP 5 years. He's only 35 or 36. He's relatively inexperienced.
Tony Blair was, and so was David Cameron.
Oh yeah, Tony Blair was leader for about 8 years, I think, before he, he was an MP for about 8 years before he became leader. So he had much longer. It's still quite a short time, but
and it was fairly young, and so was David Cameron. David Cameron kind of seemed to spring out of the woodwork.
Absolutely,
I mean, they were both. I appreciate they were both young, but I still think that it was too early for him. I'm not quite sure whether or not he's clear what his own philosophy is. And if he's not clear, and this election, the next election, is going to be extremely difficult for the Labour Party to win.
Paul, I want to get your views on this. This is a comment I mentioned from Simon Woolley of Operation Black Vote in The Voice, out today in all good news agents and some not so good news agents. The quote is, "Truth is, Chuka," this is in relation to his resignation, "Chuka has not just let himself and his family down, but he has let down a generation of black people who wanted to support him to become a future Prime Minister." That is
I think that's extremely harsh, and I think it's what's effectively saying is because he's pulled out of this race, he can never apply again. I don't agree with that. I think that he can in the future when the time is right, and probably in about 10 years' time.
Yeah, but see, I had a telephone call on the day he resigned from a senior media figure that I won't name, who was expressing very similar points of view, very, very angry, thinking that the opportunity to have a black Prime Minister has disappeared before our eyes, and there was some, consternation about that.
Well, that's making the assumption that Chuka's the only person that can ever be a Prime Minister.
Yes.
Is that what we've come to, where we think there's only one?
Yes.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, he's there now. There will be others in the future. He's there as somebody that we can all aspire to, and the future generations can aspire to in terms of look where he's got to. Doesn't mean because he's pulled out of this race, one, he can't do it, or two, others can't do it.
But it is a lost up. It is quite sad. It was kind of like, oh, Chuka's thrown his hat in. It was kind of like, what's this all about, And apparently his girlfriend is a Tory, isn't she? That's what I've heard.
I don't know. I haven't read that myself.
No.
But I wouldn't.
I've heard some things. I won't repeat them here, but I think maybe he doesn't actually.
Well, it seems to me we're putting his hat in for putting his hat in's sake, rather than actually.
No, he's
actually, would he win?
He presents very well, don't you?
He presents very well.
He presents better than Ed Miliband. He presents better than most of them.
He does present very well, but what is he presenting? And will he actually? Will he actually present policies that will win over the country at large? Because I think the problem with the Labour Party at the moment is that it's not clear where it's going.
It's about whether, and there's an article just underneath the other article in The Voice, which is headlined, "Britain has been robbed of its Obama moment." The headline's quite small there, so you probably can't pick it up on the screen there. But Britain has been robbed by of its Obama moment by Joshua Surtees, who's got an opinion piece there. So I think that is really one of the issues, isn't it? That people feel robbed of not so much about policy, but about that joyful moment. We all remember when Barack Obama was first elected. There were people in tears here. I went to a sort of a post US election party in the UK, and you had grown politicians that were blubbing with joy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I said before Obama got elected, I'd never see a black man in the White House. I never thought it would happen, let alone be re-elected. So I accept that. But America and Britain are two different pieces, and you have to remember that. And I don't think we should just think because Chuka has fallen out that's it. We'll never see it again. It will come again.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a good point to end on, really. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. I hope that you'll be joining us again sometime soon to review the papers. And we're going to be going to a break now, but coming up, we'll be speaking health with the former Ed Miliband health advisor, Patrick Vernon, who's a long-standing, or used to be a long-standing councillor for the Labour Party. So we'll be coming back with Patrick and more discussion a little bit in about a couple of minutes or so. Okay, see you then.
This is Ben Television. My name is Kayode Ogundamisi. It's your program, Politics with KO. Thursdays on this channel, Sky 182. Don't miss the debate by Nigerians and friends of Nigeria on issues surrounding Nigeria from around the world. My name is Kayode Ogundamisi.
You are the woman. The woman.
Welcome back to the Big Ben show with me, Lester Holloway and Alex Watson. Very grateful to Paul McFarlane, the employment lawyer there, for the paper review. Now we're talking health and a bit of politics mixed into it as well, with Patrick Vernon, who is a social commentator and political activist of some 20 years standing. He's also been pushing for a Windrush Day to celebrate the arrival of Caribbean and mostly Jamaican immigrants in the mid-1950s, and also former chief executive of the Fire Trust, which is a health charity, and also, to add to his very impressive CV, was a member of Ed Miliband's mental health task force. Very pleased to be joined by you, yes. Patrick. And so starting, actually, before we get to health, let's just start with a little bit of politics, because you could not have been failing to take a keen interest in the Labour leadership contest. We've just been talking about Chukwuemeka, of course, who put his hat in the ring and then took it out a few days later. We're coming on to Chukwu in just a second, but out of the sort of current main contenders, Liz Kendall, Yvette Cooper and Andy Burnham, who's your money on?
Well, can I rewind a bit?
Yes.
Personally, I don't think we should have had a leadership race at this present
time.
Oh,
we should still be having Ed Miliband as leader?
No, Ed Miliband resigned, but obviously Harriet Harman is the acting leader. And I just feel like it's going to be a rush again. 2 weeks ago, I was pounding the streets. Lots of us pounding the streets in terms of election campaign.
You're saying that Harriet should be the leader until the next general election?
No, she should be the interim leader. She's the acting leader, and then we have a post-mortem, a proper post-mortem, not a post-mortem via the media, and then we have a leadership race starting early next year. That's my personal opinion. Obviously, the NEC has made the decision to look for a leader by September.
But doesn't post-mortem also effectively mean bloodletting? In fact, the leader of the Unite union, Len McCluskey, said that if we are going to be having, and this is words to this effect, if we are going to be having some bloodletting, we might as well do it now. The longer this sort of post-mortem goes on, surely the worse it will be for the Labour Party, because figures will just simply be tearing each other apart.
No, we're going to be in opposition for the next 5 years, so we have got the luxury and the time over the next 9 to 12 months to do two things: to reflect where we are as a party, looking at the polls, the results, and there'll be more analysis and data that will come out over the next few months about what went wrong. Obviously, everyone's got their own opinion what went wrong, but we'll have more data. And secondly, we can make a proper informed choice. I just feel that it's like a knee-jerk reaction that we have to have a leader, and everyone that's come out in the leadership race have given their own analysis about what went wrong. The question which a lot of activists have been saying to me is, why didn't they share their concerns during the campaign process? So I think that it makes the case, but I mean, obviously we are where we are, so I haven't got a firm view of who I would support. I mean, I would have considered Chuka, to be quite honest, because I know Chuka, but unfortunately, due to the pressure of the media and other factors, he's pulled out. So at this present time, I'm undecided.
I think it's quite telling that you say that it's been a knee-jerk reaction, because I think that has been part of Labour's problem, is this kind of reactionary, and the Conservatives, to be honest, but to the media and to public opinion. Yes, we're here to, look at what public opinion is, but if your public opinion is mostly informed by the media, who are not really the public, there's, a cabal of, billionaires, then why are you being pushed and pulled? And I think it's quite interesting that you say that you should have waited, and because why is Harriet Harman kind of, she's immediately said, I'll be standing in, but I'm stepping down. So this has obviously been, the thoughts. It was quite immediate that this kind of leadership things happen.
This is the second time as well that she's been the interim leader, and of course other people have been making jokes, effectively saying that it's the men that mess up, and Harriet Harman is then drafted in to try and clear away their mess.
And she's not the first acting leader, as a female leader of the party. You've had other
Margaret Beckett,
as well, about around time of John Smith.
Yes, John Smith.
I thought Harriet wanted to be leader. I thought this was what she's been waiting for.
Well, she ran for leader last time around, but she didn't get very far.
Did she? No, she didn't apply last time.
Oh no, of course she went for deputy leader.
Did she went for deputy leader?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I think she'd have been confident just to hold the ring while we sort ourselves out.
So in this post-mortem, when it comes to the standing of the Labour Party in black communities, some initial analysis that was done by the Runnymede Trust that showed that, and these are just initial figures, that the BME vote for Labour increased from about 68% in 2010 to about 70% in non-winnable seats, and perhaps up to 75% in the target seats that you were really going for. I expressed a view to the director of the Runnymede Trust that actually, considering the impact of austerity on black communities, that was a lower increase in the share of the black vote for the Labour Party than really could have been expected. So if that's the case, I don't know if that's your analysis, what more do the Labour Party need to do, because they did do quite a comprehensive black manifesto. What more do they need to do to connect to black communities in the next 5 years?
Well, as you know, I'm quite involved in BME Labour and Labour Black Network, and one of the key things on the roots of the black sections is around the whole stuff around more BME representation in Parliament. So I think if there was more BME representatives in Parliament, not just African Caribbean but other communities, then I think that would make a big impact. So for example, one of the reasons why we lost Harrow East, I think if we had a Hindu candidate in Harrow East, we would have won Harrow East, but all the Hindus, I think, basically voted Conservative. So I think
Well, they voted for the white guy.
Pardon?
They voted for the white guy.
Well, he was the incumbent.
Yes.
And also as a GLA.
But they had a BME representative. I'm not quite understanding this, because they had Uma Kamaran, and they opted for the white Tory.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to say, that's the nature of how politics work. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, even going back to before then, it was difficult to justify to the electorate that you can have a BME candidate representing you. Now we've broken that mould where you have, up and down the country, across Labour and Conservative, you have BME representation. Even in rural shire areas, you've got you've got Labour, you've got Conservative MPs, and even more recently, in recent election gone, you've got Clive Lewis down in Ipswich. So we've broken the mould in terms of having BME in Norwich, BME representation. I think we need to step that another scale, but also I think the figures are misleading because it's based on people voting, and there needs to be more analysis to work out how many of us don't register to vote, and people don't register to vote because obviously there's a degree of political apathy, but a lot of people don't register to vote because there is a whole underclass of people who are living in the shadows, either because of immigration rules, their status, or they're trying to avoid debt collectors, or whoever it is. There's a whole cohort of black people who are not registered to vote for a whole variety of reasons, which means that they are more likely to have an impact on austerity compared to people who are in decent, well-paid jobs. So I think we need to work at the true figures, and we need to think of a way of getting those people to be registered to vote, if it means look at some of the rules and regulations around voter registration as well. And I think secondly, it's about the offer, and obviously Labour's offer didn't work, the Conservatives' offer worked in terms of what they were saying.
So what's going to appeal? What's going to cut through and get more black people voting Labour?
Well, I think once whoever we choose as a leader of the party is just make sure that person resonates to the feelings, the sentiments, and what the community wants. There needs to be more dialogue as well. I think, as you know, it's always been taken for granted, the black vote, and what's quite clear is actually the black vote, particularly in London, helped Labour. Without that black vote, there would have been a bigger majority for the Conservatives, would have lost more seats. But outside London, particularly in the Midlands and the North, I think we are losing the black vote. So I think there's an issue and there's hardly any black representation. You go to all the big cities, you go to Derby, Sheffield, Manchester, Bristol, Nottingham, there's hardly any black councillors, no, at least MPs. So I think for the black community, because I'm from the Midlands region, I'm in regular contact with what's happening in the Midlands and the North, and I talk to activists, and they feel that they've been let down by the Labour Party outside London.
Okay, now we're going to health.
Yeah, I've kind of change of tack here. There's been a lot in the media in the last year or two, and we've spoken about it a little bit on this show, about the child sex abuse scandals. And what I wanted to get from you as a medical, as a healthcare person, and somebody who was on the Ed Miliband task force as well, is I want people to understand how this kind of thing affects people and adults. Because I think what we hear a lot about is, MPs, we hear a lot of salubrious stuff, but I don't think we actually get the case of what the impact on people that have experienced abuse in their lives. And
Well, the task force I was involved with, under the auspices of Ed Miliband, looked mainly at adult mental health. So we didn't really look at the issue around child and adolescents. But don't you think a lot of adults that have mental health issues have had abuse issues as children? Absolutely, and there was a recent task force that was done by the government, which involved lots of children charities, which looked at CAM services. I mean, I've got a particular perspective on that. We didn't really drill down in terms of what the key issues are, but obviously people have mental health problems. There's a whole variety of reasons why people might have mental health problems. Obviously, the impact of child abuse or child rape is a big issue, and sadly, it's increasing in society. And I think it's making sure that we've got the right services. Currently, there's underfunding of children and young mental health services in the country. And when it comes to BME young people, they're actually get the worst end of the raw deal. We know
that BME people, particularly African and Caribbean people, are overrepresented in mental health. Yeah. But is the debate around mental health policy too colourblind?
Not really, because the facts and figures are there. I think the question is, there's three issues around the whole stuff around mental health. 1 in 4 of us could have a mental health problem at any time. Secondly, what is required to support us when we get back on the mend and to continue with our lives. And thirdly, what happens if we don't get that kind of support? And I think what's happened is, for the last 30 years, and every year reports are produced, particularly the Care Quality Commission. They have responsibility for the Mental Health Act and implementation of the Mental Health Act, and they produce regular reports. They do inspections of mental health trusts, and the figures are quite there. For the last 30 years, you've got an increasingly number of African Caribbean people, and particularly women, who are caught in the mental health system. When it comes to young people, young black people are underrepresented in getting access to child psychological services, which means that by the time they reach their teens, they get caught up in the adult mental health system. So there's a kind of conveyor belt that's been happening for the last 20, 30 years. And sadly, it's accelerating because psychosis, even the impact of austerity and cuts, has an impact on people's lifestyle, well-being as well. So more needs to be done. I think.
How do you know it's increasing? Where do those statistics come from?
It's just based on my observation, talking to professionals on the ground, and also there being cuts in mental health services also, which means that the gap between people accessing services and suffering in silence is actually increasing.
So you two both know more about the kind of mechanisms of the political machine than I do. What makes a government cut services like mental health without understanding the ramifications of that, not just for BAME communities, but all communities and all people? To me, when you do things like that, I'm a bit, I kind of think you must know what's going to happen. So why?
It's a wider context, because what's happened during the time of the coalition government, they recognise, they use the concept of parity of esteem. That
you'll have to explain that.
I'm going to explain that. Parity means things in terms of equality. So
parity of esteem.
So what it means that if you break your leg or you have a heart attack, you will get, 9 times out of 10, you will get the right emergency services at your door and supporting you on the mend. If you have a mental health problem, a mental health breakdown, you don't get the same quality of intervention and support. So mental health services historically have always been underfunded, have not been given the same status and recognition within the NHS. And thirdly, in terms of the wide issue around stigma and discrimination, it's been a taboo that people don't want to talk about, and that includes health professionals. So the whole idea of parity of esteem is actually how can you have mental health services or mental well-being on the same status, same level of funding and recognition as cancer services or A&E services.
And do you think it's important that they are held in?
Of course, because you have to look at the whole person. And often if you have a physical health problem, you may have a mental health problem. So if you've got cancer or diabetes, you might be depressed.
Yes.
So you need to have the right level of support. But what's happened is, despite this concept of parity of esteem, mental health services have been cut. And social care aspects around mental health delivery have been cut. So which means that the parity of esteem is illusory because it's not really delivering the needs for people in the community.
So following on from that, how do you think that these further cuts, or the NHS was a kind of big election point.
Yes.
What do you think the implications for mental health are going to be in the face of these, further austerity?
Okay, so as you know, obviously NHS was a big debate, and everyone made pledges about extra funding. So in the last few days, David Cameron has reinforced what was in the Conservative manifesto, that £8 billion would be given to the NHS by, I have to emphasise the word, by 2020, not now, by 2020. But that is subject to £22 billion worth of efficiency savings, i.e. cuts. So to get the extra £8 billion, the NHS has to do more cuts or rationalisation of services or social reconfigurations to get the £8 billion. So what does that mean for mental health? Good question. If you look at the spend that's over the last 3-4 years, there's been a reduction in mental health funding. So you could argue that that trend of cuts in mental health services will continue unless some of this extra £8 billion is going to be reinvested in stuff. One of the things that in the Conservative manifesto, it did talk about investing more in child and adult mental services, and the pledge was given before the general election of £2 billion. So we'll need to see if that will happen.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us and giving us your expertise on health and politics as well. I hope to have you in the studio again.
Okay.
Shortly. I hope you can actually sort of hang around for 15 minutes outside as well, because we do like to take a photo and tweet it of the guests and us two as presenters as well. But thank you very much for coming on the show.
Okay.
Don't go away, because afterwards you haven't called in yet, by the way. So I do want you to call in at home and join in the conversation. 0208 808 0693. Don't be shy. We'll be talking to a media expert, Chantal Miller, about all things media and indeed Caribbean. We're having a very Caribbean day here. In fact, I think I'm pretty much the only person African, the African on in the studio. But anyway, we'll be back in a couple of minutes. So don't go away. Welcome back to the Big Ben Show. We're very much involved in conversation behind the scenes, as we always are on the Big Ben Show. Welcome back with me, Lester Holloway, and Alex Watson. Very grateful to Patrick Vernon from the Labour Party for talking about all issues health and leadership, the leadership contest as well. We can still take calls on those issues if you want to call in. But right now we're talking media and also Caribbean as well. We've got joining us Chantal Miller, who is a producer and filmmaker, presenter and all-round creative synergist, she calls herself. She founded Shanti Media 3 years ago to promote Caribbean art and culture, and flicks between the island of St Nevis and London, and is an advocate as well of Afro-punk. Now, I've met a few punks in my time, but I'm not quite sure what Afro-punk actually is. You don't look like a punk, if I may say so.
Oh, okay. No, I don't think I am. Afro-punk, let's see. It's actually an American music festival. It normally takes place in New York in the summer, in Brooklyn. And to be quite honest with you, even though the name of the festival is Afro-punk, it's not a music festival that just focuses on punk music. It's more about offering an alternative perspective on what people deem to be black music. So offering up something outside of hip-hop and R&B and mainstream type of sound.
It's interesting you should say that, because when I was editor of New Nation newspaper way back in the day, we had this little sort of item in the paper every single week where we sent somebody out to stop people who are listening to iPads and find out what their top 10 songs are, or top 6 songs or whatever. And there was, all the usual sort of, hip-hop, soul, reggae, all the rest of it. But there was, with virtually everyone, there was something really, really unexpected there. And it was just fascinating to find out all this sort of heavy metal and country and all sorts of other things that we're listening to.
Absolutely. We listen to everything, and pretty much we're the basis of all music anyway.
Yes.
So people shouldn't be surprised that, the genres that we like are outside of what people kind of want to put us into a box of listening to. So that's what the festival is all about, and it's their first time actually holding it in Europe, and they chose Paris to do so.
Sure.
So very exciting.
So, what are you going to be doing? What's your remit for this festival?
My remit really is just documenting the fact that, okay, they've come to Paris, let's see who's going to attend, and also in regards to the artists, kind of delving into the ones that have some Caribbean heritage that people may not actually know about. So that's kind of our perspective.
What I wanted to talk to you about in terms of, I mean, this is in the main a kind of politics and current affairs show. In light of first of all, what did you think about what happened in the election? Were you surprised by the outcome? That's my first question.
I don't know if I was surprised, but more saddened.
Right.
Saddened by the outcome.
Did you vote?
I did.
Okay.
In order for me to have an opinion on the actual results, I did feel that I had to vote. So absolutely. I was saddened. I just thought, wow, so have people not been listening and researching and understanding what's happened in the last few years and what's going to continue to happen? I think that's, with the wealth of information that's out there, there's no way you could have been going into the elections not informed. So I was disappointed and a bit frightened.
I totally feel you in that one. And so another question I wanted to ask you, because you do a lot with filmmaking, you do a lot with culture. What do you think in terms of young black and ethnic minority people in this country? What do you think that they should, how do you think they should move with regards to their identity? Because I do feel it was a kind of two fingers up to us in a way, personally, but maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. But what do you, I mean, you're a creative person, you know who you are, so what do you think, what advice would you give to a young person in the context of this climate that we're in terms of, and thinking about Afro-punk and all that means about not being put in a box, expressing yourself? What advice would you give to a young person at this point in time for the next 5 years on how to navigate this space?
Let your voices be heard. We have smartphones. There's every way possible. You can make a film just walking down the street with your friends. If you have something to say it. And make sure there's mediums for you to be heard. The internet, I mean, when I was growing up, I won't go back that far. But we didn't have that. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have Vimeo. We didn't have Snapchat. We didn't have Instagram. Social media just didn't exist.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had to find kind of, I don't know, very interesting ways and very traditional ways of expressing ourselves and our points of views. Now, it's just out there. You can be on Snapchat. I don't even know how Snapchat works, to be honest with you. You film yourself and then it disappears. But at least for that few seconds, you've made your point.
Don't you feel that I mean, I'm a social media and technology person myself, but what I do see, or what I do feel with not all, but a lot of young people, is still, even though we've got all this technology, mentally, we're still in a kind of ghetto in terms of what we are expressing and what young people are expressing. You know, there's a lot of bullying that happens online. There's a lot of pressure to kind of be a Kardashian or a Rihanna.
Right.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like saying you can actually be yourself and you can actually utilize these tools for a positive message. But how do you cut through that when so much of the media that we actually imbibe and so much of the things that are popular are quite at their core destructive?
I don't know, it's a combination of things. I think your foundation, who you surround yourself with, and also your parents, you know, your village. It still is very much, it takes a village to raise a child. A child, to a certain degree and a certain extent, is not fully responsible for their personalities and their behavior. They shape that from what they're surrounded by.
But doesn't the concept of, you know, takes a village to raise a child kind of hark back to an era where, you know, young people weren't growing up as fast. There wasn't such changing identity. I've never known a sort of an era where there's, I've known that many eras, but you know, where there's such a disconnect, a growing disconnect between young people and even identity and the way that, you know, young black people sort of think about themselves, the way they think about black, the way they think about their heritage. It's just a maelstrom of change. You know, how do we kind of get to grips with that? And in that context, how do we take as a village, raise that child?
I think it's our responsibility. I take that personally. I think that what I do reflects back to my community. So if a young person, you know, happens to come across Shanti Media online, oh, what's this about? Oh, she's celebrating her Caribbean heritage. Oh, why is she doing that? I hope it then becomes apparent why I'm doing that and why it's important. And also, I do so in engaging ways, because the reality is there are certain things that are just not going to connect with young people today, just because of social media and the internet and media in general, and they're constant, as you said, they're being bombarded with stuff like the Kardashians and so forth. But, you know, you can also say this: I was bombarded by images of Madonna, you know, and her sex book. But still, that didn't cause me to go down a certain path. You know, I was strong enough within myself. Yeah, I actually quite admired what Madonna was doing and how she was expressing herself. But she didn't influence me in a bad way. So, and I also...
very musical earring.
I'm showing my age.
It feels like, it almost kind of sounds like, you know, where you've got those sort of chime bells that are going on.
Start singing. Are you actually from Nevis then?
I was born in Manchester. I grew up in Leeds, so I'm a norther, but
Is that in Nevis or is that
no,
in
that's here. Leeds.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah,
Leeds,
Yorkshire.
Because you're in Jamaica.
I was born here in the UK,
Right, okay.
but I did flip between Nevis and here between the ages of 12 and 22. So some of my
Nice.
schooling, thankfully, took place in the Caribbean.
Yes.
And I think that had a lot to do with shaping my identity and my...
Isn't that where Lord Nelson was married?
He was actually married
Yes.
there, and Alexander
See?
Hamilton,
Okay.
the Treasurer of the United States, many, many decades ago, and was born there as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a proud Navision Jamaican,
It's a lovely
absolutely.
little place, yeah. So what's the ethos behind the Caribbean and UK connection, and in terms of your filmmaking, photography? What's the aims for that?
For me, I mean, it's a kind of a personal story. When I decided to come back to the UK as an adult in 2002, coming from living between the Caribbean and New York for quite some time, I was really surprised at the lack of exposure that the contemporary Caribbean community, creative community was receiving here. It just, no one seemed to know that it even existed. You know, so when people thought of creatives and art from the Caribbean and the diaspora, it was all very stereotypical. And that actually, I was quite pissed off. to be honest, and always made it my business. You know, if there was someone in the Caribbean doing what I thought was an amazing thing, I would just use, you know, my Facebook page and whatever.
So where can we find out about Shanti Media?
You can go on the website, shantimedia.com.
Right.
And also social media, Twitter handle, Shanti Media, Instagram, Facebook, yep, the usual.
Okay,
The usual.
No, I know it's short and time definitely flies, but it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you
and
very
a joy
much for having me.
to have you on the show, Chantal.
Thank you.
Also to our previous guests, Patrick Vernon from the Labour Party, and also Paul McFarlane, the employment lawyer, reviewing the papers. I'm off to find some parity of esteem, which Patrick Vernon mentioned, and I'm also off to find out where Nevis is on the map as well, because here it's a big island, even bigger than Jamaica, but
No, it's
perhaps not. I'm really joking. Of course, I know it's a small island.
Sorry, people, I'm a bit. Had my little blonde moment there.
Sorry, that was just a small island joke. But anyway, we're going to be back next Thursday at 1 o'clock with plenty of guests and great debate. So join you next week.